What's up, folks? Spencer here, React Native School. I want to give another kind of live code of writing tests in React Native. I've already got tests set up. I've got this basic app set up, and we're just going to be writing some tests. So before we start, let me give you a quick rundown of what this app is doing. So over here, load it, welcome new user. I can go ahead, type in a new name, and when I press change, it'll go ahead and update that text up here. That's it. The unique thing here is that this name that's being displayed right here is actually coming from context. So if we look at our name manager, which is where we've got the context, we've got a custom hook which grabs our name context. That's what we'll use in our main screen. We've also got this name provider. This name provider is basically going to provide the data for our context. And all this is just some simple state. Let's actually just use undefined for our initial state. And we're passing a name and a save name function down, which we can then access via context in our component. Looking at our component or our screen, we've got two things. We've got the name and save name from context. That's what's actually being used to display this. And then we've also got this new name and set new name, which are local state, which are going to be updated whenever a user types into this input. So as they're typing, we update the local state. Doesn't change the title. When we press change, we reset the local state to null, and then we save that name in context, which will then go ahead and update this. And then up here for our actual title, we've got our text, which will say welcome to the name, or if there's not a name, we'll just say no name. So let's start writing some tests for this. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new file in a test directory right next to my file that I want to test. I can call this main.test.js. I'm going to import React in my test. I'm going to import render from @testing library /React Native. Then let's start writing our tests. I've got a list of tests I want to write. So we want to test if it renders default text. Initially, we're also going to be writing a test that it changes the text on submit. Those will be our first two tests. So let's go ahead and try this. We're going to render our component, which we actually need to import. So import main from //main. So I want to render this component. I'll go ahead and grab the result from render, and we expect a screen.getByText. We expect this welcome no name to show up. Welcome no name. We've got that. I'll just comment this out for right now. And then let's run our tests, which I'll do via yarn test -- watch. Okay, and we're running into an error. What is this error saying? We scroll up, it's saying cannot read property name of undefined. Well, usename is returning undefined because we're trying to access context that hasn't been set up. Easiest way to do this is to go ahead, import our name provider from //util/name manager, and then as a second argument to our render, we can go ahead and pass a provider to it. Or I'm sorry, it's not a provider. It should be a wrapper. We want to pass a wrapper that is our name provider. I don't know if I said it at the start, but this is just kind of a raw, unedited, me writing some tests in React Native when context is related. I'm not editing out my mistakes. We'll just figure them out. Okay, so we're rendering our default text because we've provided that name provider and everything is undefined. What about changing text on submit? Well, we know we'll have to do this exact same thing again. This time, let's go ahead and actually type into our input. So I'm going to grab my input. I'll grab it by the placeholder because that'll grab the actual input itself. So I'll say screen.getByPlaceholder text, which is example. And then I want to grab fire event from testing library. And I want to call fire event dot change text. Then we can go ahead and pass the input we want to access. And then the second argument is what do we want to actually type in. I'm just going to type in ASDF. Okay, so at this point, if we look over at our app, type in ASDF, we expect welcome no name to still be shown. So let's go ahead and grab that assertion. And then once we press change, that's when it should update. So I'll copy this down here. We're going to change this to ASDF. And then now we need to go ahead and press that button. I'm again going to use fire event.press. And in here though, we're going to say screen.getByText. And we're going to look for this change text and press it. And now when we run this test, it should continue to pass. Perfect. And we've got these two basic tests up and running. But what if we want to test if maybe we're not shown this welcome name. We press that button and maybe an API is called, but nothing actually happens on the user's screen. How do we go about and test that? Well, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to call this main2.test.js. Let's paste this in here. And I'm going to write a test that it calls save name on button press. So how can we go about and test this? Well, let's go ahead and just copy over some render over here. All right. So we want to make sure that a save name function, we expect save name.to be called. Actually, we expect it to be called with ASDF. Let's go ahead and do all of that stuff. So let's grab this. Okay. So we want to test that our save name function, which we see here, is called on that button press change, and that would happen after we type in the text ASDF. We see that, we've got that all set up, but how do we access this save name function? Now we'll do this in two different ways, but the easier way is basically kind of going to be a hack around this system per se. And I've done this before, it's worked well for me and it's easy to set up. First thing I want to do is get rid of my wrapper component, and I just want to render my main component. But as we know, I'm just going to comment this out so we don't have a syntax error causing an error. As we know though, our test isn't going to pass because we're expecting this name property to exist. Well, what if we change our component a little bit? And I'm not saying this is perfect, I'm not saying I would recommend this, but it's an option. Let's go ahead and change this export default to export const main is equal to this function. Okay, and then I want to go ahead and do export default, another component. I'll pull this up in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and return my main component. And I want to take any props that are passed to it and spread those down onto my component. So if I render this, all my tests in main.test.js should run and only main2 should fail. So if I look down here, main.test.js passes. So that's cool. So my main2.test.js, what I can do here is if instead of accessing this use name directly in this main component, if I go ahead and pull that out of this kind of simple component as we're making it and drop it down in here into my default export, then I can pass this name and save name down as props. So name is equal to name and save name is equal to save name. Now I can access these two properties in my simple component by doing destructuring. I can grab name and save name from here. And my tests in main test should still pass, which they do because everything's still working the same way it did before. But now in main2 test, what we can do, call save name on button press. The way I've got this set up, if you notice down here, the way I've got my prop set up is really important. I've got name and save name being passed before my props spread. What this allows me to do is actually override any props that I want to. And we'll get to this in a little bit. But the big thing here is my main component is now expecting a name and a save name prop. These props can come from context as they are in main.test.js, or if we go over to our main2 test.js and instead of using the default export, I use the named import of main and I render that, I can go ahead and create a variable called save name, which is equal to just.fn, which allows us to run assertions on it, and I can pass save name down as a prop to this, and now I can run an assertion that we expect save name to be called with ASDF. Let's see. Expected has type string, expected has value ASDF. This matcher must not have an expected argument. Oh, it should actually be to be called with. So to be called is just checking was it called. To be called with, we can check is what we expect to be passed actually passed. So now we can see it calls save name on button press because we're actually seeing that test. If I actually jump back over here, I can grab both of these tests. I can drop them in here. And let's just look at renders default text. This time, instead of using this wrapper, we can go ahead and pass a name in here, and I can just set the default name to Spencer. And now our default text should be welcome Spencer. That's working. If we jump down here, expect changes the text on submit. We can go ahead and set this to ASDF. Will this actually work? I don't know, but we kind of get the point. I do want to keep this video relatively succinct and move on to the next one. So we can see by passing props down, we can test this component. We're just kind of circumventing context altogether in this test to make it really, really easy. Okay, so what if we want to write our test but actually basically not use this hack? We want to use the exact component our application is going to be using. Once again, to do this, I'm going to create a new test file. This time I'm going to call it main.3.test.js. Let's go ahead, go over to main2 test and pull this. Actually, we'll just copy this whole thing. This time though, I want to use the default import once again. Now if I save this, we're going to see our tests are failing in main3 test.js. That's because we're not using our wrapper component. So let's go ahead. I'm actually going to say ESLint disable. Next line there. Let's go ahead and import our name provider once again from //util/name manager. And let's use our wrapper, put in our name provider, get rid of this, get rid of this. Let's run this and see what happens. Okay, we've got two tests failing. Let's just focus on our calls save name on button press right now. Okay, and we're seeing the number of calls is 0 because this save name is just, it's never being used, it's never being passed. What we can do here is instead of using the real name provider, maybe it does a bunch of complex stuff, maybe it's hitting an external API, you don't want to do all of that through your test. Let's go ahead and mock this. So what I can say is jest.mock, I'm going to pass the path to the file I want to mock, which is namemanager.js. And then basically we need to fake this entire thing at this point. So I want to first require React, because you can't use things outside of this function, this mock. So I can't use this React. I need to actually require it in here. So I'm going to say React2 is equal to require React. And then if we go down here, we can go ahead and basically do what we do in our name manager. We can create our context, set up our username, and set up our name provider. So let's call this fake username. What is this actually called? Username. Fake username is going to equal, actually we need to create our context first. So I'm going to call this fake context. It's equal to react2.createContext. I'm just going to set that as a default value, or an undefined. Then I'm going to set up a function that's going to say react2.useContext, and I want to pass that fake context in there. Let's return an object which is going to have our fake username in there, but it's going to be on the username prop because we want to fake the properties that our name manager is providing, which is username and name provider. So let's go ahead and create a name provider next. I'm going to call this fake name provider. And we want to do the same thing that we've got over here. We're just using our fake stuff. So I'm going to return my fake context.provider. We're going to pass our children down to it. And this is going to be on our name provider. Okay? The difference here, what really matters here is that rather than the value being managed and doing all this stuff inside of name provider, rather than doing that, we're just going to go ahead and pass the value on each test that we can use for that provider to put into context. So now I can say value is equal to value. I'll save this. I'm going to say ESLint. Disable next line here as well. So now what we can do, our test is still failing, but we're using a mocked or a fake version of our name provider. So we can actually pass a value to this, one of those values being save name. So let's give that a shot. But instead of using a wrapper, I'm just going to go ahead and use this in my actual render. So I'm going to say name provider and wrap my main component. And I'm going to go ahead and define the value. So I want the value of save name to be my mocked function that I set up here. Now if I save this, we should be able to pass this test because we're using this save name is being passed down via context into our main component. And when we press change, it's actually calling save name from context. So we've got that all set up. It's working well. Likewise, if we look at this, it renders default text. We could set this up. If we wrap this main provider, or I'm sorry, name provider, we wrap our main component, and we pass a value within name equal to Spencer, we should also have this test passing. So you can see we've got three different ways to go about testing context. We've got a basic, kind of the standard way, just use the actual context that you're expecting. Next up, you've kind of got a way to circumvent context altogether, just make a simple, dumb component and test that out. Or finally, kind of the most complex method is to go ahead and mock your provider context, your context in general, and just make it so you can pass the value in there so that on each test, you can just go ahead and provide that value that you expect the provider to provide you, assuming it works and you have those tests set up for your context. Assuming everything works on that end, given those values, does my screen do what I expect it to? So if you got more questions on testing React Native, using React Native testing library, please let me know. This is a subject I think a lot of people have questions about. I've had a lot of questions about. Please do let me know in the comments or reach out to me, email, Twitter, whatever. We'll cover this more on React Native School. Hope you found this valuable. If you did, Be sure to check out React Native School, where I go into more detail on all kinds of React Native stuff that is available on YouTube or at reactnativeschool.com. So with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.